104.5 The Team, your home for New York sports, Jets football, and all kinds of other cool stuff. Joining us right now, one of the fantasy insiders that we all love to pick his brain, Mr. Mike Clay. First things first, when you were in that draft at the end of the fantasy football marathon, were you shocked how many good players were falling to you?
Yeah, I was. And I guess I should have expected that because we had some of our fine NFL team and a couple celebrities in the draft. But come on. I mean, you had a couple of fantasy football ringers in there, myself, Stephania Bell, Field Yates. So, of course, we cleaned up.
There was one player in particular, especially for New York sports fans, that I thought fell pretty low, and that was Odell Beckham Jr. Why do you think Odell Beckham Jr. may not be as popular with some fantasy players this season?
Yeah, I think it's mostly narrative-driven, right? You know, the guy has had his share of off-field incidents, if you will. You know, nothing too severe, obviously, but just some things that make people uncomfortable, worried about his maturity. Also, concerns about him playing or playing at a high level with his contract on mind. But I don't pay too much attention to that. You know, I don't think that's going to deter him from playing at an extremely high level. I think he's going to have another terrific season. He's a borderline first-round pick in fantasy football drafts. You know, I think his touchdowns will probably come down a little bit just based on the history of the NFL, but that doesn't mean he can't push for 100 catches and a massive amount of receiving yards and maybe 8 or even 9 touchdowns. So I still like him. And again, at that turn, the first, second round turn in fantasy drafts, I'm happy to take him.
Mike, on a recent ESPN article, you talked about a new stat. We called it a stat that could help people win their fantasy football championships this season. The opportunity adjusted fantasy points. For those that don't know what that means, what is opportunity adjusted fantasy points?
Yeah, we're going to call it OFP. It's kind of an extension of a stat I dropped a few years ago, OTD, which is opportunity adjusted touchdowns. And what it looks at is essentially, you know, you hear a lot about, okay, this guy had X number of touches or this guy had an X number of red zone touches, but not all touches are treated equally, right? A carry from the 1 yard line is different than a carry from the 19-yard line. Just like a screen at the 50-yard line is different than than the receiver running a 9 deep down the sideline, and the receiver throws it to him, and he's targeted while standing in the middle of the end zone. That's a lot different. So basically, every single target, carry, pass attempt is weighed based on what the league average player would have done on that player, whether it's the number of fantasy points they would have scored or the number of touchdowns they would have scored, the yardage they would have acquired. And then we can basically weigh all of those and apply a number to each player, the fantasy point total, for example, that they should have had based on their opportunity. We can use that to find regression of the mean candidates, Julio Jones being a good example of that, a guy who should score more touchdowns this season. And we can also, over a long sample of work, find guys who are legit good players and other guys who are just a product of massive volume. For example, Mike Evans, who has probably fallen short, or he certainly has fallen short of expectations, but he's had massive usage, especially near the goal line. 73 end zone targets since he entered the NFL is most in the league, and he's really taken advantage of that to score a lot of fantasy points. So guys like that, you worry about if they get less volume, will they still be good fantasy assets? Maybe not so much. So I agree with what you said. What I kind of talked it up by saying that it could change the game here for us.
Mike Clay with us right now, Fantasy Football Insider, ESPN. Mike, this is actually a stat that if it catches on, could be valuable to real-world GMs as well. Like, if I can get a guy who does more with less, I might have to pay him less and still get the same touchdown production.
Yeah, I think so. And it's important to remember that it's one piece of the puzzle, right? You know, in this case, we're looking at, opportunity to score fantasy points or opportunity to score touchdowns, rack up yardage, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. You have to dig deeper. You have to watch the tape in addition to looking at the data. But you're exactly right. If you can find guys who overperform expectations over, as the sample starts to increase, they have a lot of value. And I think an example of that would probably be Adam Thielen, right? We saw that early in his career, exceeding expectations, posting big plays, even though he wasn't playing much. Then at that big year 2 years ago with the Vikings, where he was starting to get on the fringe of breaking out. And then last year they gave him the full-time gig as essentially their number one receiver, and he went nuts. So absolutely. And I've had a lot of success with this with running backs. Again, not trying to pat myself on the back here, but I'm just, I'm patting analytics or stats on the back. Guys like Chris Carson, Jordan Howard, Kareem Hunt. This year I like Jordan Wilkins a lot. I mean, these are guys who jump off the page if you look at their advanced numbers and you can kind of project them to have a good career. So far, so good, and obviously we'll keep at it.
When fantasy football players are at their live draft, some of the most common phrases we hear are, "That's a reach. Are there players that coming up, like whether it be quarterback, running back, wide receiver, that when they're at their fantasy football drafts, you say, yeah, I'm going to reach on this guy, and here's why, and it's worth the reach?
Yeah, always tricky, right, with ADP evolving all the time. You're going to kind of keep an eye on guys and see where they end up falling based on recent news. So, for example, Rashad Penny, right? He's a guy falling down draft boards right now. He's hurt, and Chris Carson, who I liked a lot last year, has kind of taken control of that backfield. But I view Rashad Penny as about as good a prospect as Kareem Hunt. I think they're very comparable. In fact, I can spend a half hour on this, but he's actually a little bit better, or he's a little bit faster than Kareem Hunt. And in terms of breaking tackles, producing after contact, very similar. So if he falls down draft boards, and you could start getting him in the 8th, 9th round, that could be a league-winning move if you scoop up a guy like Penny at that point, and by say week 3 or 4, he takes control of that backfield. So and that's coming from someone who likes Chris Carson. So I'll keep an eye on him. I'm willing to reach a little bit on Rashad Penny this season. I think Kenyon Drake's another running back I would put on that list. I'm buying in on him. He's a guy that if you go deeper into the analytics, you're seeing a player who has performed at an extremely high level, one of the best running backs efficiency-wise in the league the past 2 seasons. So he's a guy I would take a look at as well.
104.5 The Team, getting you ready for your fantasy football drafts. Mike Clay joining us right now. And Mike, is there a guy that's going really early that just blows your mind? Like you see him going high every draft, and you're like, that guy's going to completely underperform.
Oh, man. You know what? I think the guy I've been thinking about lately that's going crazy early is Tevin Coleman in round 6. The guy's been, top 25-ish running back the past 2 seasons, but the 6th round, you can still get starters. You know what I mean? Like, you can get guys that are number 1 receivers, guys that are number 1 running backs. You can get an impact tight end like Greg Olsen, Delaney Walker, Evan Ingram, Jimmy Graham at that point. So that one is kind of a head-scratcher for me. He has a cap ceiling as long as Devonta Freeman's on the field. So I don't want to knock him too much because he's a guy you can throw in your flex and be okay with it. But in round 6, I just can't seem to put my finger on why he's going that early.
Levack referenced the fantasy draft that was on television earlier this month. In that league, who do you believe is going to talk the most trash?
Oh, man. Most of the league probably qualifies. I would say if you watch the 4-hour coverage, it would probably be Michael Collins or Rex Ryan. Rex was certainly the top entertainment, I think, during that draft. He had a good old time. I love the whole Tom Brady selection and having a lot of fun with that. So I think Rex will make some noise. Michael Collins, too. He's a fellow Eagles fan, so I can't say too much about him. But, he had a good old time, too. And I think he's a little confident with that squad.
Rex Ryan strikes me as the guy that talks the most in the draft, and then as the season goes on, you're like, are you ever going to adjust your lineup?
Yeah. I could see that too, but I think you might be right on that one. We'll have to see how it plays out. We'll check in next year.
I love it. Mike Clay, ESPN Fantasy Football Insider. Follow him on Twitter at Mike Clay NFL. Mike, we appreciate your time, brother.
Hey, anytime, guys. Take care.